it said the Northeast has these bad storms going on, which may delay my package. I'm not sure why they felt that would affect my package. Luckily, it does not. But yeah, it's in the 90s already here.
Oh, wow.
But of course, I was in Mexico, Rocky Point, which is not too far away from here, about 4-hour drive, and at the beach. And it was, very warm. Also, it felt great, actually. It wasn't too hot. There was a breeze. The water was cold, but it was wonderful. And some of you are thinking, we were supposed to have a show on Monday. Well, you know what? I would rather be at the beach than doing a UFO show. Sorry, people. However, I did have a ton of fun doing our interview. This is funny. I did the interview earlier today, so this is one of the rare times that I'm actually posting the interview the same day that I did it. And we're recording the same day of the interview, but this was with Leslie Kean. And this was about UFOs, so some updates. Some people are curious, and I know some people will be listening just to hear what she says about this recent Chilean case that she wrote about, which is kind of sensitive because some people had, as you and I have discussed, had figured out it was likely a plane. Well, it's pretty much a plane. So we talk a bit about that. We talk a bit about John Podesta, since she's friends with him. And so we do talk some UFO talk before we get into her new book, which is absolutely fascinating, called Surviving Death. A journalist investigates evidence for an afterlife. And we'll go over, what's in the book in our interview, but she covers a lot of different research regarding the possibility of kind of our consciousness, how it may be able to exist outside of our body, despite of our physical body. And that's pretty weird, dude.
Yes, it is. I'm in the middle of her book right now.
Oh, you are?
I am, and it's really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
She's actually really, she's a very talented writer to begin with, but the research she's doing in this is really incredible, and it's a great book. I highly recommend it.
Awesome.
And so it's really good.
Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to hear the show.
Yeah. And you're not the first person who has told me that. I have actually spoken, because we gave away quite a few at the conference. Her publishing company sent us like a dozen, and we did some giveaways. And everybody who's gotten one that I've heard back from has and is reading it really enjoys it. They love it. So, and I'm excited. I haven't had time to read it. I don't like to read at the beach. I like to enjoy the scenery and relax in the sun. But this is definitely the next book I'll be reading because it looks fascinating.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Good. So it ought to be a fun talk here in just a little bit. Now, you've been doing some non-UFO stuff, but not on your UFO show, right?
Right. I have a separate show called I know you're going to laugh at this, the Everything Else Show. Mm-hmm. And that's because, I was doing this UFO show now for 4 years, and I'd wander into different topics and, always get kind of kicked back to going back into the UFO topic. And I said, darn it, I'm going to do a show about everything else. And actually, Leslie is coming up sometime in April on my show. And, I had Bigfoot a couple of nights ago and just some things that I'm really interested in. And
you actually had a Bigfoot on the show?
Well, he didn't say much. No, I had Stan Gordon.
Oh, okay.
On. Yeah, Stan Gordon. And I have a lot of actually really interesting shows. I have a whistleblower, CIA whistleblower. I have and if anyone's ever watched the Stephen Avery case on Netflix or anything like that, I have the prosecutor from that, and just some interesting different types of shows. It can be a lot of fun.
So a whistleblower, did he just blow a whistle?
No, he's the only one that went to prison for Americans using torture.
Oh my goodness!
He blew the whistle on it. He spent 30 months in jail. Yeah. It's a really good.
Holy moly, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Sounds like some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be, a little challenging going out of things I know, but I really love that type of thing. So I love learning about different things. So
yeah,
it'll be fun.
I've often thought of doing something like that myself. I'm just so busy. I just don't have the time, although it would be fun.
Yeah. I don't know how I'm finding the time, but yeah, I'm just doing it.
You're doing it. Well, when you're buried in snow and cold, it might be a little easier. But once the weather gets better, might be when it's hard to find some time.
Well, I sure wish I could escape this and have a little adventure myself, but I'm stuck here babysitting this big old place.
Yeah. Well, speaking of interesting topics and stuff, your purpose for being on the show is actually UFO news.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And accompanying me and helping make the show entertaining, which you do very well, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you.
So, let's UFO news. What do you got for us, buddy?
Okay, so a UFO passes rural Washington vehicle. Now, this happened all the way back in 1994, and this was reported recently on the site by Roger Marsh. So it was a large green orb, and it paced a vehicle that the witness was riding in, and this again happened on January 15th, 1994, and the guy was, the two friends were leaving Sequim and heading toward Strait of Juan de Fuca on that highway, I guess it was, and they were in like an old pickup truck, and this guy alongside of him, they both saw this thing was about 25 to 30 feet off the ground. It looked about 4 feet in diameter. And this guy's a carpenter, so he should know measurements. And at some point, they turned around and started looking at the vehicle for the green light that might be reflecting on the inside of the window. That's how they first saw it. And but anyway, it just followed behind them, and they stopped, and the object increased its speed. And all that, just one of these really odd things. And I think there was something else reported like this recently in California, not just like this, but something like this.
We talked about it.
A vehicle. Right.
I don't remember if we talked about it on my show or your show, but in California, somebody reported something similar from 1999, a white orb. But this is really weird, this story. So, 30 or 40 feet from the witnesses, 25 to 30 feet off the ground. And this whole thing about first seeing it at its reflection, but then apparently it sounds like they saw it straight on. But pretty weird report here. It
is, yeah. And so, I know there were some other cases where cars have been followed, and just kind of makes you think of something has to be intelligently controlled somehow in order to do something like this.
Yeah. Grant Cameron, has these stories about these orbs that they saw. What does he call it? The red something? I can't remember. He wrote it. It was his first book he wrote about these sightings, and that's how he got into UFOs. And we've talked about it a lot in our interview with him. We did specifically on those sightings and these orbs people were seeing, and he said he even tried to jump on one.
Really?
Run toward, he wasn't able to, but it's weird. Yeah, these orb stories. I think, what do they call them? Somebody has a term for them, I know, in the field. Orbs of light. OL something. I'm sure a listener will tell us. But, there is an acronym, because there's always an acronym for everything. But, very cool one. So also it was the anniversary Monday, and I guess I was a bit derelict in my duties because I was out of town on Monday, but I actually did log in and post some stuff on our Facebook, and we posted a video about the Phoenix Lights, because it was actually the 20th anniversary of the Phoenix Lights just on Monday. We posted a video on our YouTube with some exclusive interviews that we did with Phoenix MUFON. Excuse me. Lynn Kadai, who's done the Phoenix Lights documentary. I also posted on our Facebook a lot of stories, local stories on the Phoenix Lights, mostly which had Lynn Kadai in them. And the news called and asked if I would do some interviews, but I was just out of town. And then in our this is really cool, and this is why I think people should watch this video that we made, because the local historical society the Arizona Historical Society has this beautiful location called the Heritage Center, which is this museum, and they have a Phoenix Lights display in there. So the Heritage Center is kind of like this, the history of Phoenix, and you walk through and it goes through all the history. And towards the end, I think it's the very last thing, is this Phoenix Lights thing that you display, you walk through, and they've got a model of the object over your head. It's very, very cool. So we filmed that, and we interviewed the director of the Heritage Center. And that is all in this video at the Open Minds TV YouTube channel, Open Minds Production YouTube channel, that you can go check that out. You can also see all of this on our Facebook and everything. So nothing new regarding Phoenix Lights except for it. That's the news that it was the 20th anniversary.
Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to be talking to a few of those people on my show as well.
Oh, who?
Well, Lynn, for one, and Francis Barwood.
Oh, cool.
And also Steve Lance, who did the latest Phoenix Lights documentary that I heard is really good.
Well, it's Lynn Katai's documentary, and he helped, and they modify it, but it hasn't really, the best stuff hasn't changed for a very long time. I think it's like the documentary itself's been out 10 years. And it's very good. They keep adding to it. The new stuff they add is just kind of these, people kind of talking about what they think about the stuff, and it's very speculative, and I'm not so into it. But the first, let's say 45 minutes of that documentary is great. I mean, really good interviews with witnesses and everything.
Yeah, I heard it's a really good chronological.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they start talking about a lot of just kind of, I don't know, there's all, they get to be so many theories on, even people who think that, they understand the message that was supposed to be coming across from these craft and stuff like this. So,
I've heard a little bit about that. Little telepathy type thing people have commented about. Right.
Yeah, and then the problem out here is, I do feel that the later event that happened at about 10 p.m. Were flares over the Goldwater Range, right? Which when I did my trip, we drive alongside it. It's huge, and I see flares there all the time. I think I've talked about this. They get mistaken for UFOs often. Almost at least once a year we have this story. Are the Phoenix Lights back? Because someone thinks that flares over there are UFOs. So that sort of thing happens a lot as well. But of course, the sightings that took place on that day, all the way from Needles to Mexico, during the day are all just amazing, and just so many witnesses. Pretty cool stuff.
Right. And there's some, I know that they're not, I don't want to say they're ongoing, but there have been other sightings of similar type, orbs in formation. So I know in 2005, I know there was even earlier sightings as well.
Yeah, there have been reports. Again, a lot of these are the orbs over the Goldwater Range, but and these stories go viral, and they just turn out to be those orbs. However, Arizona has a lot of reports.
Yeah, right.
All right,
big open skies.
Big open skies and clear skies most of the year,
right?
And it's warm enough to be outside a lot of the year.
I know.
No, I'm not saying that to brag or make you feel bad, but just to explain why so many people are outside at night.
Yeah, for sure.
and there is a cure for those of you like yourself who may feel bad because you're in the cold, which is to move here.
Right. Yes, I just had that conversation yesterday with Mark D'Antonio.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Yeah, because he wants to move out here too.
That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you can call Alejandro Rojas for all of your real estate needs in the Phoenix metro area.
Shameless plug. Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other news there, buddy?
No, I'm pretty much done here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me for the beginning of the show. Let's go ahead and speak with Leslie Kean. I am happy to welcome back to the show Leslie Kean. Hello, Leslie.
Hello, Alejandro. How are you doing? I'm so happy to be with you again.
Yes, I'm doing pretty well. So finally, the conference is done. I did get a show done last week, and then I went on vacation for the weekend. So usually my show's up on Monday, but we're doing this real time. Actually, I rarely get the shows up the same day as the interview, but we'll be doing that today. So, I got it. The listeners have been kind of frustrated with not getting enough shows.
Well, I'm glad you had a vacation. You deserved it.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really nice. So it hasn't been too long since I had you on last, and you were on with Jose Ley. Is it Ley or Lie?
I think it could be either way, but in Chile, it's probably Lie.
Oh, okay.
I always say it that way, but as far as he's concerned, either way is okay. So
cool. So it's great talking with him, but that case that in particular, the most recent one that we spoke a lot about on the last show, I guess it seems you did a follow-up on the Huffington Post. It looks like that probably turned out to be an aircraft that was identified, huh?
Yeah, I mean, there was certainly some people who made a good case for that, and I did report on it. But I'm telling you, they're still working on this. The committee at CFAA, and including the head of the air traffic control system there, they're still not convinced that it was an aircraft.
Oh,
so I think
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they have a new group of French analysts who are looking at it now that they have the radar data, because the French study that was done earlier, they didn't have the radar data when they did that. So who knows? They may conclude the same thing, but they haven't heard back from them yet, and they're just not. They find it hard to accept that, not because they're trying to be defensive, but they have all these reasons why they don't think that an aircraft that was taking off and going through a low elevation to a high elevation could have been captured in the one frame of that camera that was constantly focused on the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but I don't really want to speak for them. I think what'll happen is they're going to spend some more time with it, and then hopefully I can do another story which will sort of bring more information forward about their thinking of it and the French, and maybe there'll be some resolution to it. So I just sort of am stepping aside for now and letting things unfold, and I'm happy to bring back to people who are interested as a journalist. I mean, I'm just reporting on it. I'm not taking a position on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I greatly respect the government agency in Chile, but, we'll just see what happens.
Right.
They'll keep going, and I'd be happy to provide whatever further information they come up with, and we'll see how it all plays out. I think it's pretty interesting what's happening, and I certainly do respect the work that people have done to suggest that it isn't that was that airplane. I mean, I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong. I'm just saying that the Chileans are still in process with it and not convinced. So,
yeah, and like you said, the information is very compelling. I think maybe it looks like they figured it out that the aircraft answer. But even if that is the case, and CFA comes back and says, "Oh yeah, it was an aircraft," they're such an important organization, and of course, everybody gets it wrong occasionally. I'm sure you've had some cases, or maybe you haven't, where you felt very convinced that it was one thing and it turns out to be something else. It happens to me all of the time. But they're such an important organization that I think that for anyone out there who uses this, and some people do. Unfortunately, there's of course those grouchy people on the internet that this somehow reflects poorly on them, or they shouldn't be taken seriously. I just personally completely disagree with that. I think they do some amazing work, and their outreach alone to other countries to take this topic seriously, I think, is really important.
I would absolutely agree with you. I mean, yes. I mean, they may not have as much of the highly sophisticated technology that scientists might have in America. I mean, that's so, you have to cut that. That just may be the case. And they have their own ways of going about things. But I agree with you. I think that their role in the world is what's really most important. Mm-hmm. The fact that they exist at all, that the country has an agency with 4 full-time staff people that investigate these cases, and that they have a place in that country where pilots and military and others can report cases, and the cases do get investigated. And as you said, too, they have connections with governments around the world. So they're really playing an important role in terms of getting government involvement in the topic and just bringing credibility to it on an official level. And that's so much of what's needed, in my opinion. They have put out some very interesting cases that haven't been solved. So, you're right. This one, everybody trips up sometimes. So I think you're right that their position in terms of their importance hasn't changed in my mind at all, just because of this case.
Yep. So before we leave UFOs, because of course I really want to talk about your new book, and I've let people know, this show will be one of the few that we don't mostly talk UFOs, and we do it, of course, because it's you. You've done so much for the field, and this book people are loving.
Thank you.
Generously, the publisher let us give some out at the conference, and I've been getting great feedback. But one other thing I wanted to talk to you about was John Podesta, because, of course, it hit the media big, which is good and bad, about us giving Tom DeLonge the award at the conference for Researcher of the Year, and that was mainly due to these WikiLeaks of John Podesta's, where it showed that John Podesta and Tom DeLonge met with these generals and other important people. So Tom DeLonge is actually speaking with important people. I think we talked about this a little bit last time too, but just kind of looking towards the future, we haven't heard a whole lot from John Podesta since the election. He actually did post something about a space. He essentially tweeted an article, and he used the "Truth is Out There" tag again, the one he uses for UFOs. But I mean, you're someone who talks to him. Do you think that he may be that his interest in the topic have diminished at all since the election? Do you think he'll continue to have an interest in UFOs?
Oh, yeah. I don't think his interest in the topic is ever going to diminish. Absolutely. I mean, it's a lifelong interest of his, and he's very committed to it. So obviously losing the election was a blow, and I'm sure he's had to regroup, and he's now doing some writing for the Washington Post, which I think is great. He's one of their editorial or op-ed writers. And I just think, his interest is not going to change, and hopefully he's still going to be in a position to be helpful. Mm-hmm. He's not in government right now, but in some ways that can be an advantage. Being in government has advantages and disadvantages. And so we'll see how the thing with Tom DeLonge plays out with him as well. But I can't imagine that John Podesta's interest in this is ever going to change or diminish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he just seems to have. It just seems to be a very, very strong interest, which is so interesting.
Yeah, I think he's been interested in this for a long time. Mm-hmm. And for like all of us, once you sort of get what's going on there, and for those of us who have jumped into it, we tend to not lose interest. So I can certainly relate to that. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you can too. I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you may be disappointed or once in a while, or maybe get disillusioned here or there, but the interest never fades because it really is just such a fascinating topic, and it seems as though I believe you're the same, and I'm certainly the same. That although I'm on the skeptical end, and I know you are too. I mean, I try to take a journalistic aspect to all of this as you do as a journalist. So you have to be kind of skeptical. However, I really believe there's a genuine mystery here. There are unanswered questions that just make this all so fascinating.
I completely agree, and that's the way I like to look at it. And, it's something that official governments should be engaged with. And I think that John Podesta certainly agrees with that. I mean, he wants to see the government more engaged with it. And he's also a big believer in the freedom of information, that the people have a right to know whatever there might be that we're not being given access to. So that's sort of his approach into it is through government openness, the people's right to know. And I think he recognizes the significance of this issue in a really big way. So
cool. So my last question, I guess, regarding UFOs is the other thing that you've written about recently, or in the last, it's probably maybe been a year, but that at least got a lot of coverage, was the UFO Data Project. I did get to interview Mark Rodinger about it, which was great. I always love talking to him. And that's still continuing.
It's still continuing. I mean, it's a very slow process because everybody involved has full-time jobs, families. It's all volunteer. So it's, the members are scattered all over the world, but it's definitely there and it's happening. It's just, a little bit slow, but we're all still very committed to it. And the board is working as best they can to, a lot of it is that the fundraising is always an issue in this field. And we've gotten quite a lot of donations, but we're not quite at the level we need to be at to build the first station, which is going to be the turning point for the group when we can build that first station to start collecting data. So, but we're getting closer all the time. And, I believe in the group and I think we're going to reach our goal and I'm excited about it.
Cool. Well, I'll continue to keep an eye on that and interview those guys as time goes on. But so this new book, which is kind of another supernatural topic, which is evidence for an afterlife. How did you get interested in this topic?
Well, Alejandro, I've been interested in it for a long time, and it's sort of been kind of in the background of, I was definitely more focused on UFOs, but during all the years in which I was primarily focused on UFOs, I was exploring this in various ways. I helped develop a film that was being made by Tim Coleman and just always been very interested in it. And then when our good friend Bud Hopkins died in 2011, which was 1 year after my UFO book came out, I was with him when he died. And I was very involved with the whole process of his death. And he went into hospice and it was a very peaceful, conscious kind of a dying process. And that really made a big impact on me, just being present at the moment that he took his last breath. I mean, it's a very profound experience to go through. At least it was for me, and I think it probably is for a lot of other people. It just leaves you very kind of awestruck, and it's almost surreal. It was almost surreal for me to just witness that and to be able to deal with the fact that somebody is present one moment and then they're gone, second. And it's a very hard thing to wrap your mind around how it can happen. I don't think I can explain that very well except for people who may have experienced it themselves, but it really had a big effect on me and it made me start asking, it sort of reconnected me with the desire to start asking these questions at a deeper level than I had in the past. It just was sort of like a motivation for me to jump into this a little bit more. And then, I spent about another year dealing with all the effects of the UFO book and the documentary that was on the History Channel. And then, the publisher who published the UFO book approached me and, we discussed this, and I was at that moment actually ready to approach them as well. It was really quite amazing because I had actually written up a proposal to do something on this. And that very week they called my agent and said, hey, is Leslie Kean interested in doing another book? So it all came together very naturally, and I had a meeting with them, and they were really excited about it at my publishers. And so I jumped into it, and I've been working on it ever since, and it was a very different experience than dealing with UFOs, which we can talk about if you want, but I just find it absolutely fascinating, all the material that there is. Suggestive of some kind of survival past death. I mean, we certainly can't prove that, but it's a diverse body of information, and it's really, really fascinating to me.
Yeah. I was there when my grandfather passed, and well, there's a couple aspects when it comes to, like, for instance, my grandparents, and this is an aspect that really fascinates me, is with my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
One of my aunts had come, and we were all waiting overnight because we thought it might happen that night. And she went into his room and she kind of yelled, and so we all went in there because I guess she just felt it was happening. It was very strange. So it was right after she got into the room. So we all went in the room. He opened his eyes, and he looked at my aunts and uncles and all of us who were around the bed, and then he left, and it was like he waited. It was it was one of the rare times we were all together in years, and at that moment when we're all together, he leaves, and it makes you wonder because that's inexplicable. I mean, we don't have an understanding for why things. And then with my other grandparents, they were together for many years, and they passed within a few weeks of each other. And this is something that's common.
Right.
Older couples passing within weeks of each other, or days or hours, or I think it's recorded once at the same time.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, this whole aspect of death and why this all works the way it works is another major unknown mystery.
It's another mystery, and exactly, and it makes you ask questions about whether there are forces in operation there that are not just sort of accidental. Like you said, it didn't seem like your grandfather that moment was an accident.
Mm-hmm.
You said and he opened his eyes and actually was able to make eye contact and see everybody, right, in the room.
Correct. Uh-huh.
Even though he'd probably been unconscious for a while. Right?
He had been. You're right. You're exactly correct.
That's quite extraordinary. I mean, there's studies that have been done of people in more extreme situations where you even have Alzheimer's people that are severely, with severe brain problems, who at the very end of life will suddenly become completely lucid. They call it terminal lucidity. And they've been, medical journals have studied this. There have been papers written about it where somebody who couldn't talk, let's say, for years and years and had brain damage suddenly becomes like a normal person right before they pass on. It's just bizarre. They can't explain it.
Wow. Do they have any theories as to the mechanisms that might be at work?
It's not something I know that much about, Alejandro, because for my book, it really wasn't related to the question
right.
of who survived death. So I didn't focus on a lot, but I do remember reading some papers, and I don't think that the brain people understand it.
Yeah.
But the people who are sort of connected more with the survival argument might say that, that person, just like with any kind of end-of-life experiences that normal people have, they will argue that there may be some kind of a connection that's made to the, quotes, other side, or whatever you want to call it, to whatever the other dimension is that we might be passing into, that you kind of go in and out of it at the end of life. And before you actually physically fully die, there might be some connection that you've made to that realm. And you're sort of halfway there and halfway here. And so they might argue that a person like that who has opened up to the kind of clarity that they're going to have when they leave their body. And that's why it comes through like this for somebody who doesn't even have a functioning brain. And, it all points to the argument, which I deal with in my book, about whether the consciousness can operate independently of the brain. I mean, that's a big question. And there seems to be a lot of data that suggests that indeed it can.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's an important point because it doesn't prove that we survive death, but it certainly proves the capacity for consciousness to exist independently of the brain and of the physical body, which would then make you, which certainly supports anyway the possibility that might also happen when we die.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah, let's get into some of those. So one of those areas would be near-death experience situations. What, I guess, I think it's theorized that these could just be, chemical reactions in the brain causing, these people to experience these fantasies. But what would you argue would demonstrate that this is more than that?
Well, there's a lot of things, and what I did in my book, just like I did with the UFO book, I invited some of the experts to write their own chapters, which I think is part of what the power of this book is. And in my book, Pim von Lummel, who's an expert on NDEs, wrote this absolutely fantastic chapter. And there's a lot of, I'd rather have people read it, quite honestly, or look at one of his lectures on YouTube than me try to explain it. But he deals with all the various arguments that skeptics have made about NDEs, and he has come to the conclusion that there is no one explanation that can deal with all the aspects of NDEs that explain it. Mm-hmm. Certainly, it's not a hallucination because you have to have a brain to hallucinate, and these are people that have no brain function. So I think the question of NDEs, it's the universality of them, it's the effect that they have on the experiencers, it's the similarities between them, and the main point being that when the ones that occur when there's no brain activity in a person, it's just unexplainable. But I would recommend that people, I'm not an expert on that particular topic. I'm more just somebody who wants to give a voice to the experts. But what I think interests me even more than NDEs as a journalist is what we call veridical OBEs. When people will be out of their bodies when they're essentially brain dead, and they're able to report when they wake up specific things that happened in the room when they were supposed to have been essentially dead. So they'll be able to report sounds that they've heard and things that they've seen from their position at the ceiling that they couldn't possibly have known because they were completely unconscious. And that's very evidential for the fact that the body that the consciousness is functioning outside of the body because they can actually give us specific evidence, you know what I mean? Whereas an NDE is a lot more subjective. So I feel like those veridical OBEs, and I've got some really fascinating cases of them in the book, are really significant, at least for establishing that people can perceive things without a brain, basically. They can.
Right. Can you remember a story in particular?
Well, there's one about this famous story about a shoe that was seen on a hospital ledge. Have you ever heard that story before?
No.
It's really fascinating. And it was a social worker whose name was Kimberly Clark Sharp, who was working in this big hospital in Seattle. And a woman came in and had a heart attack, and she was in the hospital, and then she had another heart attack, and she was basically dying, and they were doing all the resuscitation. She was completely unconscious, and they were doing what they do to try to bring somebody back to life when they've essentially gone, into their brain has stopped, the heart has stopped, etc. And after that event happened, this patient told the social worker, whose name is Kimberly, that when she was unconscious, when she was going through this resuscitation, she had left her body and she was outside the hospital, and on one of the windows in the hospital outside, there was a tennis shoe sitting on this ledge. And she described exactly what the shoe looked like from a perspective that could not be seen from the inside of the window. So she described things on the outside of the shoe. And, Kimberly didn't know what to think of this, but this woman begged her to go find it. She just begged Kimberly to go look for that shoe because she said she had seen it when she left her body. And it was this massive hospital. I have a picture of it in my book. I mean, you can't walk around on the outside to look for the shoe. There wasn't even a road that went around the whole thing. So Kimberly went through room by room, floor by floor, opening the windows and looking out. And she finally found this shoe on this ledge. And it fit the exact description of what this patient had told her. Parts of it being areas that were scuffed, for instance, that were not even visible from the inside of the window when she looked at it from the window. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty interesting case of, somebody who has some evidence to report back when they've come back into their bodies. That's one case that I had Kimberly actually write her own chapter in the book about her experience dealing with that. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a fascinating example. And, getting back to the NDEs, one thing that's interesting is that the explanation of the experiences, I've talked to several of these people myself, it's kind of reminiscent. I mean, you had mentioned Bud Hopkins earlier, of the abduction experience, in that you have a lot of anecdotal information, but what's compelling is they're describing kind of similar experiences. And it seems to also be true of NDEs. Many of these people of different faiths and backgrounds are experiencing or describing similar experiences, which is compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't quite been able to put that together, but I've never been so focused on the abduction issue. But I know a lot of people have said that. And I guess, the John Mack people, the people who experienced, who perceive the abduction experience as a positive one, I think there'd be more of an analogy there to the NDE, because the NDE is generally very positive for people. Mm-hmm. Of course, the Bud Hopkins, his analysis was that this was a very negative and frightening and terrifying experience for people. So in that sense, there might not be a similarity, but for many people, that they don't perceive their abductions experiences to be negative. So that is something that people have brought up. I mean, it's hard for me to kind of connect them, but that doesn't mean that I won't have more perception about that in the future. Mm-hmm. I think UFOs is a very physical phenomenon. I'm very focused on the sort of physicality of the phenomenon and what the data is that we have to show that there's a physicality to it. And then there's these other topics to me seem completely different from that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I'm sure people will have an interesting time. I think the NDEs also have this major impact on the experiencers that changes their lives. And I think certainly the abductions do the same thing.
Yeah, I guess that's what I mean, in that the described experiences are similar, even if their perceptions of whether they're bad or good may be different. There are the similarities of being taken and experimented upon and so forth. But and with NDEs, yeah, they're much more loving, positive kind of experiences, it seems. But
yeah, they don't involve anybody taking them or forcing them against their will or anything like that. I mean, it's really quite a different story than what you hear with.
Well, yeah, I guess my point being that they're both anecdotal experiences that can't be proven because they don't seem to be physical. Although, like the point you made before, there's no brain activity being registered while these experiences are being perceived with the NDE.
About them, and I think but that's why I like the OBEs that I mentioned, because they're actually concrete. When somebody comes back and says, "Hey, I saw this doctor up there," one person from the ceiling described that the doctor, one of the people was bald that was working on him, for instance. Mm-hmm. And describe what the sounds of machines that were making in the room at certain intervals, which allowed them to actually relate a time to when he was out of his body. So they can come back with specific information, and there's no way to explain how they could have acquired that, especially when they're looking at it from the viewpoint of the ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Now, these OBEs, where people come back and are able to describe something they shouldn't have been able to see or hear, is that more common than people may be aware of?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure I'm sure it is, because just like any phenomenon, lots of times it'll happen. The person won't talk about it, or they might talk about it right after it happens, but we don't hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to kind of assume that it probably is. But, so we can only focus on the cases we know about, but I suspect there probably are more than we know.
Mm-hmm. So you get into many other aspects, such as children who come back and seem to have experienced or remember a past life.
Yeah, I find those cases really interesting. I start the book with them because I think they're very easy for people to grasp, and where you have very young children. One of the cases in my book, the child was only 2 and literally just beginning to talk. And the children come out with so many very specific memories of what they say is a life they lived before. And what the cases that are significant have 2 components. Number one, there's a record kept of what the child says before anything is known about who that child might have been. Mm-hmm. So it's recorded, it's written down, it's filmed by reliable sources. And number 2, eventually there's enough specifics that the child provides that investigators are able to actually figure out who the person was in the past life. They're able to locate through records that the person existed and find family members that are still living and are able to confirm that what the child said was 100% accurate. And so when you have cases like that, and when you have a 2-year-old child talking about names and places that he couldn't possibly know anything about, and in one case, the child had continuous nightmares reliving his previous death, which was horrific.
Wow.
And parents didn't know what to make of it. And then he would tell them things about this, and they were so specific that they were eventually able to figure out who he was in the past life, and everything that he had told them turned out to be accurate. And this was a kid in diapers. Mm-hmm. They often play act the careers of the previous person. They'll have a lot of information and knowledge about a certain area that the previous person was involved with that they have never been exposed to. Things like that. So those cases are really very difficult to explain away. And, to just explain them away. And the skeptics can say, well, they're all fantasies or something, but they can't say that in the cases that have been solved because what they're giving are so specific. And they turn out to be right. They turned out to be true because they were able to find that person. So those cases, they're really, really interesting to me. And I've got 2 cases in my book that are, I think, really fascinating that involve small American children. And they don't just happen in Eastern, in Asian countries where reincarnation is well accepted. They actually happen in the United States, too.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, my girlfriend loves those stories. She's always giving me these books to read about these sorts of stories, too. But, and we're always commenting because I love watching child prodigies, especially musical prodigies. And no doubt, when they begin singing or playing their instruments, they look wise. They almost look old. And the expressions and the emotions they seem to be experiencing are just beyond what they can have personally experienced in their short lifetimes.
No, it's quite phenomenal. I mean, who knows if some of the musical prodigies are, reliving something from past life. We have no way of knowing. It's only when they give you the information and then you can verify it, that you can have any proof of anything. And that's why these cases are so significant. When you might have like a list of 12 facts, 12 very specific points that a child makes. You have no idea who he's talking about. You're able to somehow find that. There's various ways you can find that person because you have enough information they've told you about to try to look them up, right? You find who a person was that fits the description. You find their family members and you find out that all 12 points are accurate. Then it's sort of, you're not just speculating about, well, maybe this was a past life. You're actually seeing that the specific points that the child made correspond perfectly to the life of one specific person, the very person that child says that they were in the past life. And they might know a lot more. I mean, the case in my book, I've got the 12 points that are all points that were recorded before anything was known about the previous personality. But the child told his parents all kinds of other stuff too. So it's just mind-boggling for a parent when this happens too.
Yep.
So it really points towards, consciousness continuing from one life to another somehow. Or some connection being made between that child and that previous person, that person who died. In this case, the person died, I think, about 40 years before the child was even born and had no connection at all to the family, the current family. So anyway, it's very mysterious, and it certainly makes you wonder if somehow that consciousness has continued on in some form and then kind of come through this child again. That's with the past. If that indeed is the case, then there's some kind of continuity of consciousness that has occurred, after death and before death. And so that sort of sets my book into this exploration of how could this be possible, and how is it possible that consciousness could possibly, could continue on like that and exist independently of the physical body. And so I look at a lot of different ways that suggests that could be the case.
And there could be, it's entirely, because I think of all this quite a bit, and I know there are people who talk to this, there could be even scientific explanations. In other words, mechanisms that one day in the distant future we may understand.
Through scientific mechanisms, you mean?
Yeah, for instance, there are some that talk about, a sort of this consciousness. There may be reasons, the properties of it, and why it does, like you say, kind of inhabit another body in the future.
Right, or how it operates independently of the brain. And that's one, also Pim von Lummel, who I mentioned earlier, writes a beautiful couple of paragraphs about just what he calls non-local consciousness, and how the brain, rather than being the creator of consciousness, could be more of a receiver for consciousness that is out in sort of this cloud, in a way out there. And that, anyway, it's a whole different way of looking at it from the sort of the materialistic paradigm that we have now that science has offered us, which says that everything is rooted biologically, everything has a biological or a material source. And nonetheless, science is not able to explain how the brain would create consciousness. That has not yet happened. So it's up for debate, absolutely up for debate. There's no proof that the brain creates consciousness.
Well, and these theories also allow for something else that you get into, which is mediumship. The possibility that maybe some of these people are really getting messages or somehow able to communicate with non-physical consciousness.
Yeah, for a lot, it's hard to find the terminology.
Yeah.
But yes, the question then becomes if indeed consciousness is able to exist independently of the brain, which I think I've been able to show, pretty well that that's very likely in the book. And then take the step of, well, if that's the case, can we actually communicate with these consciousnesses when they're not in the body? It seems sort of, if you take it one step at a time, it doesn't seem like a terribly ridiculous question. If consciousness is out there, can we speak? Can we connect with it? Can we communicate to it? And so that's where mediumship comes in, as you brought up. And I had some incredible. I sort of decided to test it myself, and I had 2 very incredible readings with these outstanding mediums, which I describe in the book, and I give the specific things that they brought through, and they were very, very accurate. And they brought through not only the specific information about the person that they said was coming from, there were 2 people, but also the personalities came through. And so it's very compelling. You're sitting there, and I was very careful, particularly with the second reading, that the medium didn't know my name. I made up a fake name. I took out a whole new email address that didn't involve my names in order to communicate with the medium. And she had no idea even where on the whole planet I was. She was in Ireland, but I could have been anywhere in the world because we just communicated through Skype on the day of the reading. Prior to that, it was all communication through email with a completely phony name. And this woman who didn't even know my name sat there in Skype with me and gave me, 30, I don't know how many accurate data points from these people, which she said were from the people that I was connected to who had died. It's just mind blowing when that happens to you. You can't comprehend it. How can this be? And as I say in the book, it's either what she says it is, that there is a deceased consciousness speaking through her, or it's the medium using her own very sophisticated and refined psychic abilities to access the information through her own telepathy or clairvoyance. In other words, to sort of read my mind as opposed to getting information from somebody who had died. I mean, those are the only two options that I can think of to explain it. And either one of them is extraordinary. Either one of them is a challenge to the materialist paradigm. But I was extremely careful that there's no way this person could have known anything about me ahead of time. So it shows that the process of mediumship works. And it's how you explain it that's the interesting question. But the fact that it even works is something a lot of people don't accept. So that alone isn't. It's sort of like with UFOs. The fact that the phenomenon exists was really the focus of my book, and that alone to me is extraordinary, and that we really have data to prove that there is a real phenomenon. It's the interpretation of it that's up for grabs. Are they extraterrestrial? Where are they from? We don't have definitive answers to that. Just like, and to me, there's sort of a parallel there. With mediumship, we know that the phenomenon of mediumship can work. And the question is the interpretation of it. Are the messages coming from deceased people, or are they coming from the telepathy, the powers of the medium to just read minds? We don't know for sure. But, and of course, it's similar too in the fact that there are, of course, many fraudulent mediums out there, many deluded mediums who think they can do things they can't do. The majority of them, we wouldn't want to have anything to do with them. They use cold reading techniques and things like that to fool people. But it's that nugget of 10% or whatever, just like with the UFOs, the very, very key and important mediums that can do it, that we're interested in. Those are the ones that, are really worth studying. And there are actual scientists that are studying these mediums too, in the labs and so on. That's sort of my take on mediumship, but it's very compelling when you have an experience of it yourself.
Well, and it's cool in our conversation in your book that you talk about past lives and the possibility of this sort of reincarnation being possible and the evidence of it, and along with the mediumship. And this is always something that makes me curious, is that, if these bodies reincarnate, how are they speaking with a consciousness that may have already reincarnated?
Well, I mean, I think most mediums are clear that they are speaking with a consciousness that is not reincarnated. And maybe not everybody even does reincarnate. I mean, we don't really know much about it, They're speaking with a consciousness that has, it's often somebody who has, but not always, somebody may have died, with not too long ago, because the sitter, the person seeking the medium, is usually trying to connect with somebody that they've lost not too long ago, because they're grieving, or they want to make that connection. So, as far as I experienced it, it's somebody that clearly has died. I don't know if maybe they do readings sometimes with people who are in the, I can't imagine it happening that way. You mean that somebody's actually in a physical body and the medium will actually get a reading for, messages from them while they're in the physical body?
Not that I know of, but my question, why haven't they reincarnated? How can they connect with everyone if some people have reincarnated? And there's been one scientist who's told me that it could be that the mechanism doesn't work in the same space-time that we work in, and that, they have been able to register, at least on the, very small level, the, particles or atoms that don't work with time the way that
Right.
And that could be something going on there. Who
Absolutely.
knows?
It opens up a lot of unanswered questions. And that's one of the
Mhm.
reasons I love this material too, is because it just points even more deeply to the mystery of the whole thing. There's so many questions that we can't answer, but are fascinating to contemplate.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, I do want to touch on this before we're done. You even tackle kind of ghosts or some of these things being able to materialize and maybe even manipulate the physical world.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, that's in a way the most fascinating part of all of this. Even though I try to walk people through the book gradually so that when they get to this very more mind-boggling stuff, they're kind of ready for it. So I in some ways, I don't like to talk about it out of context, but, it's very, very weird stuff. Apparitions are, of course, fascinating. I don't think anybody really has an issue with apparitions. And I do have Lloyd Auerbach, who's been studying them forever, talk about them. Great, fascinating cases of apparitions actually providing information about their lives when they were here on Earth, and which is later able to be verified. And the apparitions, you have multiple witnesses to them. So
wow,
it's not like just some guy having a beer and seeing a ghost. It's real studies that are done, just like, it's a serious case studies that are done that are fascinating. But, physical mediumship is to me, sort of the I don't know what you would call it, the sort of exclamation point, that, and is so strange and so shocking and so wonderful to study and to be part of. And I do write quite a bit about that, where you actually have some kinds of forces coming through that can manipulate physical objects, which people can see consistently. So it's not, and everybody agrees about what they're seeing. They can be studied. These mediums can be studied, and they actually do facilitate materializations of things and levitations of things. So it's mind-boggling. But as far as the mediums themselves are convinced that they are dealing with energies from people who have died, in terms of not just the mental mediums we talked about earlier, but the physical mediums also, who are actually in trance, and it's a very different process when their readings are done or their sittings are held with groups. But anyway, there's also the realm of after-death communications, which I think so many people have experienced that, where somebody has died who they're close to, and they experience themselves receiving communications or physical effects in their homes involving electrical appliances, very, very, very vivid dreams that they feel are not actually dreams, but they're actually contacting that person. So that's another realm of I find fascinating, in which I've also had personal experiences with after-death communications, and there have been studies done on them as well. So the book kind of integrates my own experiences. It's more about research and studies, but it also integrates my own personal experiences with all of this, because unlike with UFOs, with this topic, you can go out and put yourself into it and test it yourself in various ways. And you can, sometimes you'll have experiences, whereas they're just more available to you than whereas with UFO, of course, you have no way of knowing if you're ever going to see one. Mm-hmm. So this is something you can jump into in a different way. And the whole book for me was very much of a personal exploration as well as a study, a research endeavor. And so in that way, it was very different from UFOs. When I began, I didn't know where I would end up, really. And with UFOs, I had studied it for a decade already before I wrote the book. So I kind of knew what I was going to say. But with this, it was a more of a discovery process as I went along. And it still is. I'm still, learning and very fascinated by it and very involved with it. So it was different in that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a great way to put it together, to take people on this journey of, putting the pieces together to demonstrate that each, like you said, areas of this phenomena has been studied and has been, thought about by experts, and there are papers and there's research out there. And so it I guess kind of like the UFO phenomena, is not necessarily as strange as a lot of people think it might be. Although the one difficult aspect of this arena is there's more religious kind of beliefs that come into play.
Right. And everybody, and this is not a religious book in the slightest. I'm not a religious person, but I personally, I would hope that the information in this book would not really be seen as challenging or somehow conflicting with religious beliefs. I mean, I think it can be integrated very well. It's just, I think most religions deal with the question of the afterlife. And maybe people would be interested in seeing that there's actual data that suggests that it's not just about belief systems. We'll see. Maybe some people won't like some of the data in it because maybe some religions believe that once you're in the next realm, you can't communicate, for instance. I don't know, but I'm just looking at what we know and what we don't know about. And there's so many different areas too that to draw from. And as I say, there, as you said, there's sort of a progression of going from one to the next. And that's also another way it's different from UFOs. I think this work is much more complex and multi-layered than the UFO work was for me anyway. I'm drawing from so many different areas and kind of showing how they all connect. It's very important for me to see how they interconnect and are mutually supportive, how they all point in the same direction, even though they're often presented as separate areas. I've sort of shown how they all interconnect, and I think that's really important. But it's way more complicated for me than the UFOs topic. And yeah, there's a religious belief system that comes into play, but I've kept that out of the book completely, so people can make use of it in whatever way they want to.
Yeah, personal, almost like the UFO area actually also. It's personal experience accounts for so much. So many people have had personal experiences along these lines. I've done a lot of different paranormal research and writing, even though I mostly focus on UFOs now. I used to do more ghost hunting, although I hadn't had any of my own personal experiences. There was a time where I just felt this love, this really deep love for this friend who had cancer and was struggling, and I hadn't heard any updates, but the last update I had heard was positive, and I just felt really strongly for her, and I thought, I hope she's okay. I was shopping, I think at Target or Walmart or some store, I remember, and then I got a phone call either the next day, not very long after, and I just knew when I saw it was a mutual friend who was calling me. I knew, oh my gosh, this is what the phone call was about, and sure enough, that's what the phone call was about, that this mutual friend had passed. And I asked about what time, and she said it was last night, which was about the same time I had that feeling. And there are so many similar stories to that, and some people with loved ones, when their loved one passes, they physically see them in their home or something.
Right. Yep, that's a fairly common thing, and that is also something that Peter Fenwick has explored in my book, who's an expert on end of life experiences, and I think he calls them deathbed coincidences, when someone, in some cases, the person, the recipient, which was what you were in that situation, doesn't even, has no idea that the person's died, like you didn't. They might not even know that the person was sick. And then suddenly they'll get a vision of the person, or they'll feel like the person's visiting them, or they'll get, whatever it is, something will manifest in their lives very close to the time of that death. And it's fascinating, and it's quite common actually, right around the time of death. So, that could be explained as something psychic that's going on, that you were connected to that person. So you might have had a psychic perception of your own of that person. Who knows? But it doesn't feel that way, right? It feels like it's something external from you, the recipient, that has entered into space, entered into your reality. You don't feel like you're the one creating that. So that's what's so compelling about it.
Yeah, it's compelling, and I'm not a religious person either, but it's beautiful in that it's possible maybe we can kind of, give this goodbye message of this love or hello or as we exit this existence. It's spiritual and beautiful even for the non-religious.
Right, and that's the message that usually comes through the mediums as well, if people are willing to accept that, that the place that we do dwell in after death is a beautiful one, that people are happy and full of love there. Mm-hmm. There's so many people, when someone dies and they're grieving, they're so worried and about the person and are they, anyway, it's often very reassuring for people who are grieving. If they have a reading with a medium that's accurate, it has to be specific enough that you can be really convinced that there's something to it, right? It can't just be sort of generalities that can apply to anyone. But when they're very, very specific and the medium brings forth information that is known to only a few people, maybe just you and the person who's died even, it's very comforting to people. And because then they believe that there is some kind of continuity and that they also are usually given the message that the person who died is in a loving space and that it's a beautiful environment to be in and things like that. So it serves a purpose for people who are grieving.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing about this book. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. Everybody that has gotten a copy that I've talked to is really loving it. So I can't wait to read it myself, which I have not done because I was on the beach, to be honest.
You were on vacation.
Yeah. Too busy working on my tan and running around on the beach and having fun. But it's definitely the next book I'm going to read. But thank you so much for coming on and being willing to come on and to talk about this and give us some updates on the different UFO stuff at the beginning. And where's the best place for people to get the book?
Well, the book, first of all, it's called Surviving Death. A journalist investigates evidence for an afterlife. And the best place to go is a new website that we've set up for this book. It also has the UFO book on it. And the website is survivingdeathkane.com. So it's the title of the book, Surviving Death, my last name, which is KEAN.com. I also have a Facebook page under my name that has a lot of stuff on it as well. So.
All right. And I'm sharing the Facebook posts that you put and retweeting your tweets as well. So sharing that information that way. But
Alejandro, thank you so much, and all my best to you and everybody listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
Thank you so much to Leslie for coming on the show. I know this was a little bit different. It wasn't UFOs, but it's still very interesting. I hope you all agree. And of course, as Leslie and I talked about, I think there are quite a few similarities. But, both rely on anecdotal information, but there's also been studies done that people don't know about. So really interesting, and both, of course, kind of weird topics that people kind of raise their eyebrows to or kind of taboo somewhat, like we talked about. But a great book. Everybody's got to check it out. As you heard from Martin and as I've heard from others, people who are reading the book really like it. So Surviving Death, and you can go to survivingdeathkane.com. Kane is spelled Kean. Leslie Kean. So, thank you also to Martin, speaking of Martin, who helped us with the news at the beginning of the show. And thank you to you all for being so patient. Hopefully you were patient. Some of you actually weren't so patient, but most of you were pretty patient, and that's very appreciated, and waiting for the show to come out. So, of course, it came out on a Wednesday, but hey, we got one out this week. And hopefully I'll have one out by Monday. I'll have to work on that and get that arranged. But like I said, sorry, beach wins. Beach always wins for me. But We've got more shows coming up, so stay tuned. There's lots of exciting stuff on the horizon that we'll be able to share with you all as time goes on. And also, like I said, go to our YouTube channel, Open Minds Production YouTube channel, and you'll be able to check out the video that we put together for the Phoenix Lights. Also, be sure to check out our video on demand, because we're posting some of the 2017 UFO Congress videos on there. So go subscribe for a small monthly fee, and you'll be able to watch all kinds of great video info, including previous lectures from Leslie Kean that when she's presented at the Congress. Also, when it comes to the Phoenix Lights, we've got Frances Barwood, who was the city councilwoman during the Phoenix Lights incident. She was a Phoenix City Councilwoman. I've interviewed her on Open Minds UFO Radio before. However, her discussion at the Congress was great because it's just so terribly interesting, everything that she went through to try to investigate what the heck was going on and the problems she ran into trying to do that. So go check out her lecture and more at the video on demand portal, where you can get just hours and hours and hours of videos and great information to watch. Other than that, that's it for the show. Thank you to Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music. That music is super cool. If you want to know more about Caleb Hanks' music, you can go to the Open Minds UFO Radio tab.